Lesley, thank you very much for joining us. You and I have done a lot of work together, and I have to say I've really enjoyed it. So I'm very interested to hear your advice for our students that come out of this session. So we thought we'd start off with just a general question about your background. You've worked in the private sector, you've worked in the academic sector, and in the public sector. So just talk us a bit through your background, because I think that gives people a context.
So yes, I worked in the private sector, academia, and government. I started in government. It really what set the path for my career. And there's two paths you can take. The first is to move into an area, a technical area where you build your knowledge and you stay there and you progress through the ranks to become a technical manager. Well, I didn't do that path. I actually chose to work in different areas rather than one area. So if you can appreciate in geospatial and in the government department, there's many areas you can work. So I worked in topographic mapping, tourist mapping, addressing, naming, native title, photogrammetry, aerial photography, and remote sensing. So I actually got technical experience. And of course, that is a slower road to actually achieving a leadership position, because you have to, every time you change roles, you have to start from the bottom. And what I ended up with was experience across a number of different areas that later I used, gave me, I guess, more strategic leadership, because I could appreciate how things work together, how the different areas linked up. And if you can imagine, the cadastre links with the topographic data and street addressing and so forth. So moving into a leadership role, I ended up being the director of mapping for Western Australia, which is a third of Australia. It's a lot of mapping. And I was the first woman as well. But I think it's partly because of having that technical knowledge in a broad range of areas and moving into an area which is something that I enjoy, which is more strategic thinking. And I'm much more comfortable working with a whiteboard, talking with people, than I am working with a spreadsheet. And to give an example, I guess one of the projects I worked on early on was addressing. And we in the agency had a number of areas that were collecting addressing information, and so everyone was collecting addressing data, and of course they were all out of sync across those databases. So my project was to actually bring them all to have one single source of truth data set. I then moved into another position, again from a project position to a management position, and that gave me the opportunity to look across the different government sectors. So I worked with a number of agencies to actually work out and devise a single address system for Western Australia. So that was quite an achievement. And I think that's partly from understanding how the different areas operate. So while it takes a longer to get through the leadership ranks, I guess, by moving about, it did actually help me in the long run. I was in academia because I studied. I left school very young and got a job, I guess. And so all my studies were done through evening classes. So it took me a while. So I felt like while I was in government, I was also educating myself through for many, many years, 10 years of study at night. And I did my PhD with a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old. I don't know if you can recall that, Andy. That was challenging enough to do a PhD, but when they're young, it was even more so.
Well, I think a lot of people would really admire you for doing that, Lesley. I mean, that's a remarkable thing to manage those kind of family responsibilities. So
Yeah,
it's great to hear.
Thank you. It was a matter of working very quickly while they were having an afternoon nap. And to think I was in these leadership roles, so I had some time off from the government to do that piece of work. But look, it got me interested in research. I did it because there was a problem I wanted to solve. It was about spatial data supply chains, where it comes from, where it goes to. and it was all about updating maps automatically. I wanted to solve that problem, which is why I did that piece of work. And it stood me in good stead, though, from later becoming a consultant. So, so I left Langay after I felt we had addressed many of the challenges, because it was all about business improvements when I was working there. And then moving into running my own business. But of course, I stepped away and I had no money because I had no clients, and I needed some time to actually generate that business, which has been running for 12 years now, I might add. But what I did was I went to the university and started doing some teaching, and then that led to being involved in a cooperative research centre for spatial information. And so I worked with them for 4 years part-time. So I was building the business and doing the consulting at the same time as doing this research. I wanted to mention it because later on, it would be great to talk about the geospatial information ecosystem. And some of that research work that was done there, it was a strategy. I had 10 PhD students to manage with other researchers. And it was about redesigning how spatial data infrastructures, if you could actually redesign one from scratch today, what would it look like? And that's the part of the research, and the students were working at different parts of that supply chain. And then and then of course the clients picked up, and I started to work a lot more with the World Bank, with the United Nations, and with a lot of countries. As an example, my first foray, I guess, was working with Sri Lanka. It was a great opportunity, this one, because they were so well organized when I went in country, and that's not quite the case, as you would appreciate, Andy. But they already had an NSDI committee, so they had their leadership in place with their committee. It had representatives from across government, and they had 4 ministers who were supportive of this work and really wanted to see data sharing and the use of data. The other interesting thing from the Sri Lanka one was that it was the Disaster Management Centre who were the lead agency. They had the World Bank funding. They wanted to create a common operating picture, a map that could be used by all the emergency services organisations. But of course, they didn't have any data. It was all with the Environment Branch and the Lands Department and Transport and so forth. So they needed people to share information with them to actually create the maps that they needed for disaster management. And of course, this is not, I mean, it was moved on quite a bit since the tsunami, but if you can appreciate, at the time, the people came to the maps. So there was a representative from emergency services, ambulance, police, army, navy. They all came into the Disaster Management Centre to use the same map. Whereas today, as we know it, the maps are actually shared out on iPads and so forth. But it wasn't the case. So it was really, really interesting. But I mentioned that one because the leadership in getting that off the ground was so integral to their success. And they actually delivered their spatial data infrastructure with data within 3 years from having nothing.
And I think, Lesley, the impressive thing there is that's an example of leadership without direct authority. That the authority actually lay with those ministers or whatever. But you were driving the ship from the back, if I can put it like that. And that's I mean, that's a key skill. What do you put down your success in doing that to?
Yes, well, I guess the recommendation that they get people in the room. It's all about people talking and understanding different perspectives. They had tried this process before. They'd written a fantastic policy for data sharing, but no one wanted to sign up to it. So it is because it was just a fait accompli put in front of them, and there wasn't the conversations around why it was important, nor the leadership. So my first thing was to online, and this was before online was a thing, was online working with them to help them set up a workshop. And we did that, and all ministers are there, the 4 ministers there, environment, lands, disaster management, and the senior Minister for Science and Technology. Now, he actually presented, and he was so positive that he shared, he was medical background, that he shared the story and showed that he understood the importance of geospatial. And he said when he used to go fishing, they used to look for the hot and cold waters. So where they meet, that's where the fish congregated. And he said in the old days, they used to throw the thermometer overboard and pull it up and check, and then steer the ship to cooler areas or whatever it is. I'm not a fisherman. But of course, with thermal data, he appreciated that with thermal data on board these ships, you can actually move to those locations where the fish are likely to be. And of course, that saves petrol, time, puts food on the table, all the things that we're trying to achieve with the Sustainable Development Goals. So the fact that he came up with this story, and I had worked in fishing hotspots back at Landgate as well, I really was, really excited. And there is some we've done this before, we've had these conversations. There were some tricky people to deal with that were left out of meetings. I actually encouraged them to bring them in. They were very vocal, but at the end of the process, and I will always remember this, the gentleman stood up and said that he'd read the document, which was 90 pages, maybe more, from start to finish, and agreed with everything. And this is what we needed. And there you go. So went from someone who was skeptical of it, and particularly people don't understand spatial data infrastructures. But that was a journey as well. So
and it's often them feeling that they've been listened to.
Yes.
That's actually the key. Okay, well, look, in the interest of time, Lesley, let's move on. One of the things that you've been doing, and you've alluded to it a little bit here, with the UN Global Geospatial Information Management Group, is around this future ecosystem. And I think people are going to be really interested to hear that. We're all interested, I think, in where the future might lie. And I know you've been central to this work, so it'd be nice for you to just tease out some of the main points that you think are important.
Yeah. So the vision behind moving towards a geospatial information ecosystem is one, to actually address global challenges. Two, to put knowledge in the hands of everyone. And three, to make sure no one's left behind in the process. But I think I need to step back and talk about what the ecosystem is. And so we think about spatial data infrastructures that we're creating feed into this ecosystem. So the ecosystem is like a global database, and we have a global database, and it's called the World Wide Web. And it has a lot of information and data in there. And we post information to that World Wide Web. So we have this global database, but we can't use it in the way that we want to as yet. So if we think about this global database, the more data that we add into this database, the more we can use that information to make those decisions that we need to make. So there's two sides of this coin. One is about countries developing their data, improving its quality and making it accessible. So it can be used. And then there's the other side, which is making it accessible on this global database, where we have other tools such as artificial intelligence that we can use to start processing some of this information. How can I explain it so that it's simple? Okay, if you think of the music industry, the music industry was creating records. We were pushing records out, like pushing data out as we do today. But there might only be one song on that record that was ever any use to us or that we liked, but we have to buy the whole record. And now we've seen the transition of the music industry to things like Spotify. And Spotify means that I can now pull the songs that I want towards me, and I don't have to buy a whole record. I can just have access to that one song. I don't even have to touch a button, sorry. I can just ask Siri, and Siri will play the music that I want. And that's the transition. So the SDIs, we're sort of in this record manufacturing business, pushing out lots and lots of data, when really now in the ecosystem, it's moving to answering people's questions. So people have a question and they want to pull the answer. So we're not pulling a song, we're pulling an answer towards us. Now, there's a lot of leadership required in this transition. If you can appreciate, the music industry went through a whole change phase, a huge cultural shift, a paradigm shift in how they did this, and it required leadership. And that's where the UN is at the moment, is what leadership is needed on a number of fronts. And interestingly, we can draw from the IGIF, which is the Integrated Geospatial Information Framework. We need to think about the different governance. So the music industry had to think about the different governance processes around it. It had to think about the different policies, about the copyrights and legalities around sharing people's music and making money out of it. So there was different financial models. There was different standards. All the music industry had to come up with the same standards so they can play it on the same platform. So they had to move from analog data to digital data. They had to innovate in these platforms, and they had to also go through a process of raising awareness to the public and the rest of the industry about this new model. And that's kind of where we're at with the geospatial sector, is understanding that this data can be used in different ways, and we have different tools where we can start to innovate, and we want to answer those questions. So if I ask Siri at the moment to how much fertilizer should I put on my field? I'm holding my phone. She knows where I'm standing because the GPS, we know where it is located in the world. We have imagery covering that field, but Siri at the moment can't answer that question because we in industry haven't formatted our data correctly, and we haven't told Siri, I'll call her her, we haven't told her how to process that data and give an answer. And that's where we're at. And in the manufacturing industry, we call this the decoupling point. So it's the point where we're pushing out information and where we are then pulling it. So it's like made to order. So where we're pulling that information. And at the moment, it's like having two train carriages that are decoupled. And so we've got to work out how to join them together. And that's going to take a combination of government, academia, and business as well to actually solve all those issues. So it's about the ecosystem. It evolves and it grows and adapts like the World Wide Web does with more and more data. But what we have to build strength in is about creating more and more algorithms to actually query data. And that's where we're kind of lacking at the moment. So that's the ecosystem. It doesn't belong to anyone.
There that are really critical are that there's a number of business models that have to change. You know, that you call them financial models for organizations like national mapping organizations, you know, who certainly in the UK make a lot of money. The Ordnance Survey is a profitable business. As we move to on demand, they need to look at and they are, to be fair to them, looking at their business model. And also there are new players that come into the industry. I think particularly for ours, we've seen ourselves in the past, I think probably wrongly, as quite insular. Now we're going to need to be much more of a player in a more integrated, multidisciplinary kind of environment. Is that the way you see it?
I do, and we focus with governments now on that they should make data accessible and for free. But it actually, if it's embedded within an application, every time a query, someone has a question, it'll hit a piece of data. And if the questions are popular questions, it'll hit that data more. And every time it hits it, that's where you could, government could actually make money from their data through other businesses. So they could share data freely available, excuse me, They could share data freely available, or they could make it accessible to these commercial companies for it's called the token economy.
Mm.
And every time it hits, they get a token.
Yeah, yeah,
And so there is a way there. And I think I presented not long ago to ISPRS. They had a conference here in Perth and trying to talk about remote sensing companies. They've got all this imagery and they mostly make money of selling data. They don't actually sell the applications or the questions that that data is used for. But if they actually move up the value chain and joined in with AI companies, they could actually be the ones who are, changing the way this works, because they could offer an application is $2. So you put that in the hands of everyone. So the Kenyan farmer could have an application and be asking those questions about farming. It could be a farming application, answer a number of questions. Why not? Why not make it accessible? But it's the multiplier, isn't it? As you would know, it's the
yeah.
multiplier. How many people would use that application? But they're not using data. They have no idea what data does. They don't know how to download data. They just know how to ask the question.
Well, they don't actually care about the data. What they want, as you've just said, is the answer. Sometimes, I mean, that tokenization is referred to as a transactional model, where every individual transaction, there is a small amount of money that goes back to maintaining the data. I think this is an important topic for anybody who is in a management and leadership position, needs to be able to talk about, provide some thought leadership. And this is an area where I think we're capable as an industry of being able to bring new things to a wide range of industries. So thanks for that. That's really really useful, and we might circle back on that.
I actually have an example, if I can. We're currently working with the local main roads company, department, and they wanted to know the safety rating of each of their roads that they manage. That's what they put out. That's the question that they asked. What the company did was collect LiDAR data. They collected, using AI, all the information. So the curvature of the road, the steepness, the speed limit, the time that the road had been resurfaced. Speed limit, did I say that? How close the trees were to the roads, all this information. And then using that information, then they put that into the algorithm and said, okay, well, if there's a lot of trees that are close to the edge of the road, that makes it unsafe. If it's a very curved and windy road, it's less safe. And they came up with a safety rating. And that's what the roads department wanted. They also got the LiDAR data, which was great quality data, but it was the question they wanted answered, not the data they wanted collected. And I thought that was a great example of how to use AI. You mentioned about the paper. I would just flag that paper was written before GeoAI was a thing. ChatGPT hadn't been heard of. And I think it is worthy of a reread, because I think today, with more that we know about AI, it will make more sense.
Okay, look, that's great. Let's move on. And we touched on this a bit. Is your key tips around how you communicate the geospatial proposition to senior managers and do it in a way that engages them. I think your fishing story from Sri Lanka is great, but I've also heard you present to other countries and in other scenarios. So just talk about what you think are the key learning points of that communications process.
I approach it by trying to think about my audience first. It didn't come naturally to start with, but now I make it a practice to think about who the audience is and what it is they're probably looking for. I remember having a great discussion with a lady that I came across some years ago. She was working for an aid agency, and we were talking about this. And she said, you know, once I had to deliver a presentation on women's health to an all-male audience and for them to make decisions, policy decisions about women's health. And I sort of went, how did that go? And she said, well, I got them in the room and I didn't want to lose them. And she said, I could see this happening. And she said, I first asked them, who are the most important people in their life? And she said, they said, my father, my mother, my sons. And she said, okay, so who looks after you and your parents and your children? And they said, my wife. And she said, okay, so if your wife is sick, who looks after these important people? And they said, no one. So women's health is really important. And she said, I didn't lose one person. They stayed there for the whole thing, learned about, you know, different measures for women's health, and hopefully it was going to be embedded in policy. But I just thought what she did was frame it up of what was important in how they thought. I mean, it's different in different cultures, obviously, different in different cultures. So quite often we have to speak on geospatial, and people don't know what geospatial is. I have seen it done really well when someone has expressed their story about, you don't know what geospatial is, but you use it every day. And they've talked about it in terms of as soon as you get up in the morning and even before you get to work, how often you've already used your navigation system, checked out the weather, and ordered something online that to your address. And then to even move into how other agencies do things. So if that day you're paying for your house insurance, well, the insurance company have used geospatial information to determine how much of a risk your house is because of where it's located. To talk about if you are sick and need an ambulance, it needs to know where you are. So when you start explaining that it's actually embedded in everything, then you can and frame it up in what it means to other people, then you can start telling your story. So everyone is on the same page and appreciates the importance of it. But again, you've put it in the context of how they understand it. I guess that's it. But the story is important. And I guess I like to use pictures to tell a story. I use diagrams as well, and I like them to grow on screen. Sometimes if you don't use words, that can be a problem. So, because it means you forget things. So, and I know, Andy, you know, I have these little bubbles that kind of just pop up every so often. And that's usually the things that I don't want to forget to say, because otherwise you finish and you go, oh, I've forgotten to say something. That was important to say. So I do that because I don't have necessarily all the words. It does mean you have to practice. I would suggest everyone practices and goes through the flow, and twice. Usually the first time you've picked up so many spelling mistakes that it's kind of been a bit disjoint. So you have to go back and do it again, because timing is really important. And people tend to say one slide for is 1 minute. So 15 slide for a 15-minute session. When you're doing pictures and telling stories, it's a little bit harder to time it. And you tend to have more slides because you've got more pictures that flow with your story. But I actually think that, well, it helps me and I like to do it that way. Practice is important. Every TED talk that you hear that goes so smoothly, they've all practiced.
Well, I was going to say, I think you know, if there's one text I'd give people to read, and I've got it on my shelf over there, is a lady who actually has done an analysis of TED Talks and picked out the 7 key points that actually have made the most successful TED Talks. So that's one of the things I think we're going to put into this for reading. So yeah, that's, I mean, I think the thing we ought to re-underline is this business about first person stories. You've given a couple, and the more often you can do that, that's what the TED Talk people will tell you, that the ones that are rated most highly, they have used right up front a first person story. And as you say, the other thing is the framing of the context, because you need to bring people to that common starting point and engage them. So that's excellent stuff, Lesley. Thank you. Thank you very much for that. So moving on, we've now got a question that you and I have discussed, and I'd sort of encapsulate this, and you can go off piste, I think, on this one. Is how do you build trust with stakeholders? It's key to any kind of activity where you're a leader, because your stakeholders may be your internal team, but what's some of the secret sauce of doing that?
So firstly is just to understand the client. So it's two-way sharing. So when you first meet, it's about understanding what their issues are, understanding about them and what they're trying to achieve, their vision for the future, but also sharing some of the stories that you've got, coming back to stories of how you're in the same boat. Once upon a time, yeah, we had this same problem, and this is what we did. So again, I think it comes back to that. In countries I've worked, trust is hugely important. In Vietnam, we've worked together. Trust and doing business is all about getting to know each other. I had the good fortune to work in the office of one of the agencies I worked with, and I got to know them really well. And we went from hardly being able to communicate, this was some years ago, and to miming to talking on the phone within 4 weeks. So particularly this young woman I met, and sharing. First I started with the photographs, and that was some good advice someone gave to me many years ago, is take it, because we didn't have cameras. I'm talking a few years ago. And I pointed mother, father, my sons, and then they shared as well. So it's all about sharing some of you and giving them the opportunity to share some of them. So that's working at it more of a personal level. But again, understanding their issues, and then, but really showing that you listen. You have to be authentic. There's no way about it. Look, I've had to work with a number of clients where we've gone in to meet their stakeholders, and I think this is really critical, where you need to shine. One, because you're representing the client, you don't want to embarrass them in any way, and you do need to show that you know things as well, and they typically introduce you as Dr. This, and you've done this, and so that's good, because it's kind of important that they must get people come through all the time. You don't want to be wasting their time. I like to start by going through introductions really well, listening to where they work, and I always write down their name as we go through. If you're in control, it's always good to actually comment, thank you very much, that's an interesting area you work, or I understand that area, just as a touch point, and you're already starting to engage. And I really think that's a critical bit to do. And then give them, sometimes they don't have any idea why you're in the room. This may be the first opportunity that your client, typically the land agency, has started the conversation with their stakeholder about what is a spatial data infrastructure. I remember one client actually thought we were stealing their data. Now, when you've gone through the meeting to say, no, we're not coming here to take your data away from you, it's about sharing data for sure. But it's really the end game is about empowering decision making for the country. And when they start to actually, that light glow moment is why I love doing what I do, is because you can see it getting through, and you can see the stakeholders, that point in which they're going to work together. So yes, so some stakeholders are very skeptical about what this project is about. The other thing is the language that we use, and we need to be really careful. So going in and talking about sharing data is what creates a lot of confusion. I prefer to use custodianship. It's all about enhancing your custodianship around your data. It's giving you the power to share that data with who you like. And there's some guidelines here that will help you. It's about enabling you to share that data, but that they remain the custodian, the owner of that data. And I think that actually starts to clarify what is in essence the spatial data infrastructure. It's not about taking over the roles of or the mandates of each other agency. It's about working together so you can ask better questions. The one I like is to talk about the layering of information. So we think of the infrastructure about layers of data. And when you start to talk about dropping the pencil through, so if I want to find all the interests on my land, whether it's has heritage significance, whether I need to abide by water usage rules, waste, whether there's any mining rights over that land, what it can be used for. Simply, if you drop that pencil through layers of information, whether it be the Environment Department or the Heritage Department or the Transport Department, you'll find out if they've actually zoned it for another purpose if you're purchasing. So that dropping that pencil through, that often quite means that people understand how layers of information work together.
And it's something you can do very graphically as well. That's where animation of that kind of concept, I think, is really powerful. Well, Lesley, look, this has been a fantastic talk. There's so much I think that you've brought to the table there, and it's going to be a challenge for us to compress it down because there's not very much we'd want to take out when we do the editing. But just finally, is there anything else that you've been in academia, you've led groups of students? Is there anything else that you think that our students might benefit from, whatever nature it is, that you'd like to bring to the table?
Two pieces of advice that I have been given. One is about presenting. So just leading on from those presentations. One is that your audience is your friend. Your audience is not sitting back going, "Ooh, I hope they make a mistake. I hope they go really bad." No, no, no. Your audience is your friend. They're there to listen. They want you to do well. So go in and be confident is the one thing. The other one, and I think I kind of mentioned it when I said about worrying that I've forgotten to say something. Quite often meetings are a struggle for people, for young leaders. You go into a meeting and you sometimes, and I've done this, I've walked out either I forgot to say something, I think I didn't say something very well, or I wish I'd responded to someone else's remark differently, right? And the advice given to me is, oh, you should never worry. When you walk out that room, don't worry. And I go, why? Because, well, one, it'll take you to an early grave, or this worry about nothing. But the key point is that only you ever remember what was said in that room. Everyone else only remembers what they said. So you're worrying about nothing. So just it's just a piece of advice, because I will always remember that.
And I think the key thing you said there is be self-confident, because you probably know more about the material. That's the only reason why you were invited into the room. And as long as you don't make it up, then actually you can also, to take your point about, I wish I'd said this, usually what I try and do is construct some kind of takeaway that you can follow up. And actually, what you can do is you can say in that follow up, by the way, maybe this wasn't quite so clear. This is what I meant. And it's that call to action, the sales guys would call it, that needs to be in there at the end. Okay, Lesley, thanks so much for your time. And I realise this is cutting into your evening, so we won't keep you any longer.